Welcome everyone to Caribbean Connect Lunch and Learn series. My name is Shavani Sinarain, and I'm here really to introduce Aka Ali, who is going to bring some great conversation on leadership. We have a number of different training programs that we have launched right here on Caribbean Connect with Aka, so we look forward to introducing those programs and having you a part of it as we talk on a very interesting topic on leadership. So who is Aka? Aka Ali Kerr is a John Maxwell certified coach, trainer, and speaker. She is also a recent author of the book, The Master Guide to Leadership Through the Lens of Care. And actually, I read the book, a very good book. She has facilitated workshops, seminars, and coaching to aid personal and professional growth through the study and practical application effective, proven leadership methods. Working together, she has moved leaders and their teams in the desired direction to reach their organizational goals. A dynamic human resource leader, she has advanced interpersonal skills that has focused on achieving individual and team objectives. Aka was being able to earn respect around the strategic table by understanding the goals and objectives of the business and ensuring that her HR team is aligned with achieving the business goals. Aka has a passion and love for people, which has been demonstrated for more than 20 years in developing and implementing best practice strategies in compensation, recruitment, and selection, training and development, job analysis, industrial relations, and organizational design and employee relations. Thank you very much, Aka, for being right here on our Lunch and Learn series on innovation. Today we have one with you on leadership. Next week we have some Excel tips. Then we have yoga and
introduction. I am humbled to be asked to do this presentation. This is something that's so near and dear to me. I always say that leadership is a badge of honor, not a badge of power. So I am passionate about how do we evolve as leaders. And so today I'm going to take an hour. It's going to be compact, but we are going to get through this. We're going to get through this hour. And if you want to ask questions, put it in the chat, or you can unmute yourself. So we are going to get started. So today what we're going to talk about is evolutionary leadership. And I'm going to put a different spin on what you may know as evolutionary leadership. And I have found that as I navigated through my career, how I've had to evolve depending on the situation, depending on the person, depending on the environment. As I speak about environment, I am actually speaking to you from Miami. I work for Hyatt Corporation. So I was in Trinidad at Hyatt Regency Trinidad, and I got the amazing opportunity to be the HR director at one of our hotels on Miami Beach. So even part of my career, I've now evolved. So I am now living the life of an expat in a country that I am familiar with, but I have to now live in and be a part of that amazing dynamic culture. And what is underpinning as an evolutionary leader has been these 6 mandates that I have inculcated into who I am. It's care with action, consistency with accountability, and competence with the right attitude. And I have found that these 6 mandates have really been part of my journey and will always be part of who I am. So I wanted to share this picture because I want to tell you, even before we get to how we evolve as leaders, I want to share with you how I have evolved as a person. So a few years ago, a reporter came to our home. My mother, she's now deceased. She was an actress in Trinidad. And I was born, I'm not going to say the year because then you'll tell my age. When I was born, I was the only child for 14 years. And then I remember the day mommy came and she told me, Aka, you're going to be a big sister. And I was not happy. And she had Ola Tunji. Ola is also a soca artist as well. So I wanted to share this because I lived in a house of extroverts. And I've always been an introvert. And to keep up with Ola and mommy, I felt it was exhausting. So I have evolved as a person, as a leader. So I'm not an introvert. I'm not an extrovert. I'm an ambivert. And I don't know if everyone on this call has ever heard that ambivert. So an ambivert, we could switch. We could go introvert, we could go extrovert. So I wanted to share with you that even as a person, we evolve. And I have evolved, and now I'm actually happy that there's something called an ambivert, because I thought being an extrovert was exhausting. And I don't know if there's anyone on this call right now who could identify with being back and forth. So I need to go to a quiet place to rejuvenate. So this is my evolution as a person. And so today we're going to talk about evolution as a leader. So there are a couple of things I wanted to just to set the context. So evolutionary leadership, what is this? It's a theory that determines how leaders are able to navigate and how they impact both directly and indirectly, depending on the team, depending on the situations that they're in. And there are two considerations when you are in that type of environment. It is, how do you add value as an evolutionary leader? And how do you ensure that you are using the right leadership style depending on who is on your team? You know, I've found many leaders would come to me and say, Aka, I'm having difficulty with this particular person. And so I would start to ask questions. So tell me about the person. And then they would share. Recently, the person said, well, the person is a new hire. So I said, so, okay, so how are you leading that person? And when they shared with me, I smiled. Because the way that they were leading that person who is a new hire did not augur well with pulling that person to a place of comfort. So today, we are going to talk about all the different leadership styles and how we as leaders, we need to do this word. And this is a word that we use often right now. We're going to pivot. We are going to learn how important it is for us to pivot as leaders. And during this pandemic, we have had to pivot so many times. Wow. And this definition, I was reading this article from Forbes yesterday, and it says, it means changing direction of a business when you realize what is currently happening may not be in alignment with what needs to happen. And so I am going to use this word pivot. So I wanted to put it into context. When I say pivot, this is what I mean. And as I was doing this presentation, I thought about how we as human beings, we evolve, right? I mean, we evolve from the fetus to being a baby and a child, adolescence, being an adult and elderly. And, you know, I was thinking recently, there's some things that I still do as a child. You know, like I love eggs. But as a child, mommy would put a little ketchup on the side when I had my eggs. And I realized that sometimes I do that as well. So me eating ketchup with eggs is not bad. But I pulled it from my childhood. But there's not everything that I did as a child that I do now, because I have evolved. And as I shared with you previously, being born as an only child for 14 years, an introvert, I've now pivoted and evolved to be an ambivert. So I'm going to talk a little bit, but I thought this analogy really resonated, and I hope it resonates with everyone on this call. So when I think of being at that very introductory stage, when we talk about leadership, we think about maybe someone who is autocratic or bureaucratic. And then the other ones that we hear about is being a democratic leader or charismatic or even transformational. And a few months ago, when I came on to evolutionary leadership, I said, wow, this to me epitomizes the ultimate high performance leader. So we're going to go a little deep with that today. And I hope at the end of it, you understand the importance of us consistently evolving as leaders. So let's talk a little bit. And I know for many on this call, this is a refresher. So I'm going to just go over this at a high level. So when we talk about someone who's autocratic, and I know we may have worked with some autocratic leaders, these leaders are really going to consult. They are really in charge of the decisions that they make. They're not high on involvement. So they will just do what they have to do, and you get an FYI, let's just do this. The advantages of this though is that there's no stress because they did it on their own. They didn't need to listen to anyone. They implemented this on their own. They very rarely would consult with others, and they're able to make decisions quickly because there's no team involvement. Of course, the disadvantage of that is lack of team involvement, right? Because when I always say this, and this is something that my GM actually laughs about. I said, when you have an entire meeting and you are the only voice in that meeting, something is wrong, because the root word of meeting means to meet. So in that environment, how do we get that involvement? So that requires a switching of your leadership style. The next leadership style that we hear a lot about is a bureaucratic leadership style. So it's very process driven. It's you do this, then you do this, then you do this. There's no variation. Sometimes, and not to make anyone uncomfortable on this call, sometimes we find that in more government driven organizations where you have to fill out this form in order to get this done. There's no circumventing the process. So that environment is very, very structured. Now, the advantages of a very structured environment says that you're going to get consistency because the form has to be filled out a particular way every time. And if you don't, you have to do it over. I remember there was one time I went to a government agency, not going to name any names, and I filled out a form. And when I got to the counter, the young lady looked at me and she said, "Ma'am, you need to do this in blue ink." And I thought, okay, but you didn't say that on the form. And she said, "I cannot accept it because I use a different color ink." And I said, "But it's the same information." But she said, "This is the rule." So, and there are many organizations like that. There are rules, but a bureaucratic style leadership, there's never a why. This is what it needs to happen. This is what needs to get done. So the disadvantages of that is that it's difficult to be creative because there is so much structure. All right. So that environment augurs well for a particular culture, a particular industry. I could not imagine. So as I mentioned to you before, I work in hospitality. And the only difference with Hilton versus Hyatt versus Four Seasons versus Ritz-Carlton is service. It's the human it's the interaction. It's the authentic connection. So in hospitality, we have to be creative. We cannot take one approach for every guest. So that environment for us does not align to hospitality. So then we speak about democratic leadership style. And this person, they are, everybody, let's talk. Let's come. So I don't know if you've ever been in a meeting where the meeting is scheduled for an hour and the meeting goes to 3 hours, because every discussion point is now a group discussion point. And there's a lot of dialogue. It's full of energy, and it just goes on and on. Now, it's good because there's involvement. But the flip side of always using a democratic style of leadership is that it takes a longer time to make a decision, because you want to get everybody's say, everybody is involved in the decision. But remember, I told you at the beginning, is that it's not that it's bad, but we're going to talk about when do you use the right leadership style depending on the person and depending on the situation. So we are going to talk a little bit about that. This is a very popular one. Everybody wants to be under a charismatic leader, right? They just exude this charisma. They walk into a room and the entire room, like there's a light that follows them wherever they go. They are so charismatic. These leaders, high on influence. So they influence people constantly. They're always getting buy-in. People gravitate towards them. Now, the advantage of this is that the person, because they have a lot of influence, and I remember John always says that leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. So this charismatic leader is able to influence others just because of who they are. But on the flip side, the disadvantage of this is that this person is, because they so depend on others being influenced, if their influence is not positive, then it does not augur well for the team. But because they're so charismatic, people gravitate towards them. And because of that, sometimes there's human error, because people don't focus on the why. They focus on the who. And so that charismatic leader does not always consistently get the best out of the situation, out of the group, out of their team. This is actually within the last 15 to 20 years, transformational leadership has been at the forefront, because there was a desire as we get into the 21st century, how do we transform our organization? Whether it is digitalization, whether it is now, there's a lot of conversation about hybrid. So this transformational leader is able to consistently transform the organization. So they're able to change the organization. They're able to allow open-mindedness. So a transformational leader, they are very open-minded. So they receive feedback and they have that very open door policy. So because of that, they have a very honest, trusting environment, because people understand that their transformational opportunities and skills is assumingly for better. So transformational leaders have that organization of excellence, excellent communication, always at the forefront of any innovation. But the disadvantage of a transformational leader, though, is that because they're constantly changing and innovating, sometimes the team gets burnt out. I would love for someone to just comment in the chat, just put a yes. Have you ever been in an organization where the strategy changed every other month? I mean, sometimes it could be a little daunting. And so these types of leaders, because they're always looking for what's best, they're consistently transforming. But what happens in the organization is that the organization does not have the opportunity to settle. So we are going to talk about this. Evolutionary leadership, the style. Now, this style for me, and this is again my takeaway after reading about evolutionary leadership, it's the ability to use different leadership styles depending on the person, depending on the situation. Because remember when I told you there are things that I do as a child that I do now as an adult. It does not mean that I'm still a child, but there are things that I love or things that I do that makes me better that I still do today. So as leaders, it's not that bureaucratic, autocratic, charismatic are bad. But what I'm saying is that your leadership style has to evolve depending on the person, depending on the situation, depending on the maturity of the team. There's one thing I always observe. I love to observe when I go into new settings. And so when I go into settings and I see a leader presenting one topic, but they didn't use any difference in how they communicate. So the words that they use are the same. The pictures that they use are the same. That does not connect with everyone consistently. There's some people who learn differently. So they're audible or they're visual. So you have to be able to evolve depending on your audience, all right? So today, this is what we're going to focus on, but I wanted to just give context that I'm not saying that any leadership style is bad nor good. What I'm saying is that we cannot use the same leadership style consistently with persons, and it does not vary depending on the person's level, their competence, or the longevity in the organization. So some characteristics of evolutionary leadership is this continuous desire to learn and to grow. Some advantages of that is that you are constantly evolving. So you never settle. You never say to yourself, I'm finished learning. I'm good. I have all my letters after my name. I'm good. I'm good. I'm good. An evolutionary leader never settles. They're always thinking, how can I be better? How can I learn? How can I grow? How can I pivot? How can I be the best version of myself? Now, there are some disadvantages to evolutionary leadership, and I always like to be transparent. In doing that, sometimes it is, again, it's time consuming, right? Because if you have 10 people in your team and you have to switch your leadership style depending on the person, depending on the task, that takes a lot more effort from the leader. But I always say that no one said leadership was easy. And to really add value to people, you have to meet them at their point of need. So if my team member needs more coaching, then I have to meet them at their point of need. So I'm going to talk a little bit about, and this is something I would love for someone to share if they have ever used situational the situational approach. And again, with my reading of Evolutionary Leadership, it talks a lot about that leader being able to evolve depending on the situation. And I thought that it is important for me to also talk about this situational approach. So in any team, you have persons who are either high competence or moderate competence, low competence, or new. So for this particular methodology, it labels persons as D1, which is low competence, high commitment, D2, which is low competence, low commitment, D3, which is a medium to high competence and variable commitment, and then someone who is a D4, who is high commitment, high competence. What is interesting about this particular approach, and this is done by Ken Blanchard, so you could also do some research on him. This is excellent. What he says to us as leaders, he says that we have to adjust our leadership styles depending on the situation. So he then links the D1 to D4 to our leadership style, which is if you are leading someone who is low commitment, low competence, then your leadership style should be more of a directive, because this person needs more support. So for example, just to put it into context, you just hired someone out of university. They have no work experience. How do you lead this person? This leadership style requires an S1 leadership style, which says that I am going to give you tasks. We're going to meet on this day. This is what I need you to do by this time. All right, so you are going to link your leadership style depending on the person. If you have someone in your organization who is low commitment and low competence, something is wrong. Whether the person is disgruntled or not happy in the role, or they're not in the right role, how do you lead this person effectively? How do you evolve your leadership style? This person requires more of a supportive environment, because you're trying to understand, why are you not engaged? Why are you not committed? So you would do more of explaining the why. You would get to, I want you to do this because this is the impact of this task. Make sense? So you have to evolve your leadership style depending on the situation. And if you, for instance, you have someone who has a lot of potential, how do you lead someone who has a lot of potential? This person, then you need to listen, because if you've ever had someone who has that potential, they're like a dynamite just getting ready to explode, you need to give them the opportunity to be heard. You need to support them. Yes, so that leadership style is more in alignment to bringing that person from that medium to take them to D4. A D4 person says, I am ready to be promoted. How do you lead someone who's ready to be promoted? How do you make sure that they don't lose their luster? How do you ensure that they stay engaged? You have to switch your leadership style, because I don't know if anyone on this call has ever been micromanaged. Micromanagement is not for a highly competent and highly committed staff member. But there are many leaders who because they use the same leadership style for everyone on their team, they micromanage high performers, which actually makes a high performer become demotivated and become a low performer. And I've had those conversations many times with leaders. They would say, Aka, but so-and-so was a high performer and now they're not performing. So I would ask, why? What has changed? And so as leaders, we need to be more in tune and cognizant with how we lead others. So remember, I was sharing with you, how do you link your leadership style depending on the person? So, and I mentioned, if you are leading a D4, then you're an S4, and that's more delegation. So this particular slide says, if you are leading someone who is a highly competent, then delegation is the best way to have them be the best version of themselves. So you give them tasks to do, you give them projects to do. This will really evoke more engagement with this person. And with a D3, how do you tweak your style? Your S3, it's more participating, right? Because this person is on the brink of being a high performer, so you need to get more involvement with them, right? S2, so again, this person, remember, this person they are wavering in the middle. They have one foot in, as my grandmother used to say, they have one foot in and one foot out. This is actually, I was reading recently the silent resignation. I don't know if anyone ever has read this. They're actually, because of the pandemic and the different changes, there are people who are resigning while they're at work. Low commitment. They just don't want to be here. How do you lead someone who you know does not want to be there? What do? You have to become more like a salesperson, right? You need to have those conversations about, why do you want to be here? We value you. How can I keep you? What do you want to do differently? So you now become a sales agent, for that person. And then finally, when we talk about a D1, so this is more of your new hire or somebody who was recently promoted, it's telling, right? So your leadership style has to evolve. Just curious, when you think about this leadership style of telling, S1, what leadership style comes to mind? Of the 6 that I spoke about previously, what leadership style you think is more along the lines of telling? You could just put it in the chat. What leadership style do you think is more along the lines of telling? Anyone? Or you could unmute your mic. Anyone wants to try? Aha, I see. Yep, there you go. Thank you very much. Thank you. Is it Nikisa? Am I pronouncing your name correctly? Nikisa?
Nikasa.
Thank you so much. You're right. So that is more of an autocratic style leadership. But is it wrong or is it right? It's the right depending on the person. So if you use autocratic style of leadership with someone who is a new hire who needs direction, then it will work, but it will not work indefinitely. So when that person has gone past that learning curve, then you need to evolve. You need to change your leadership style so that the person consistently remains engaged. Yes. AJ?
Hi, sorry, yes.
Tell me a little bit about that comment. Tell me a little bit about that.
In terms of given the scenario, given that model,
yes.
Because based on your discussion, you're saying that basically we have to be flexible pretty much and not to evolve your style. So being that it's situational, of course, we have to choose the appropriate style for the appropriate situation.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you so much. That is true. So we have to be able, as we are evolving, as we become that leader, we must be able to change depending on the person. And sometimes it's dependent on the task. I want to share a little bit of a story with you. So before I started working at Hyatt, I worked in telecommunications. So I worked for a company that was on fiber to the home, voice over IP, those types of words, jargon. So when I started working at Hyatt 11 years ago, I said to myself, I said, Akka, you know HR, but you don't know the industry. You don't know hospitality. So at that point, I would have been, as it pertains to hospitality, I would have been a D1 because I was just entering into an environment that I didn't know. So I made a decision that for the first 2 months, I would put on the uniform of every job in the industry because I wanted to know, what does a housekeeper do? What is the life like of making 17 beds in one day? What is it like to be a steward or work an overnight shift? So what I did, and this was something that I spoke to my GM about, he said, Akka, I love this idea because I really wanted to understand every job because I knew that I was entering into an industry that I knew nothing of other than on the other side, which is checking into a hotel. But I knew that there must be an engine. What is the pulse? What is the life of working for hospitality? So I allowed myself to know each job so that I could build my competence to become a D4 in the core tasks of hospitality. So, and as I said in my objectives, I think that underpinning everything that we do, there's 6 mandates that I spoke about previously. Am I breaking up? Sorry, everyone, let me know. Is everyone hearing me?
Yes, please.
Sorry, Tia, what you said?
I can hear you. I can hear you.
You are, okay, lovely. Okay, all right, perfect. So what we're going to talk about now are these 6 mandates, right? Care with action, consistency with accountability, competence with the right attitude. And you could easily remember it as the 3 C's and 3 A's of leadership. So, care with action. There's a saying that John Maxwell uses all the time. He says that people do not care how much you know until they know how much you care. Wow. We have been in situations where people say something, but their actions are not in alignment with their words. As that leader that is able to pivot, we must ensure that our words are always in alignment with our actions. Because you know what? Do you know that care is a verb? It's not a noun. It's not an adjective. It's a verb. And I know everyone in here remembers when we were in primary school, a verb is a doing and a telling word. So as leaders, we can't only say that we care, we need to show that we care. And I think this particular mandate became so pervasive in this pandemic. We had to care for people. We had to meet people at their point of need. And interestingly, that's why I wrote my book, The Master Guide to Leadership Through the Lens of Care, because many leaders in the pandemic called and said, Akka, I'm struggling. My technical skills are no longer what the organization needs. My organization needs emotional intelligence. My organization needs empathy. And many leaders because they never used that muscle got atrophy. Because they never really showed care. They didn't know that the members of their team were single mothers with 3 children. But you know what? In the pandemic, they found out, because that worker came to them and said, I need to work from home because my children cannot go to school and I need the flexibility of working from home, but they never knew it before. And as leaders, one of the key parts of being a leader is that you must be a leader that you would like to follow. You must make those authentic connections with your team, because you know what? People stay with leaders in a crisis. Leaders that had a high turnover in the crisis, there was a level of mistrust. And there was a research study done by Gallup. And they said over 65% of persons leave managers and not organizations. So we must be that leader that allows people to gravitate towards, that leader that is able to influence. So some leadership essentials that I want to touch on is SEC. And this is one of the things that I want you to take away as a leader. You need to smile, you need to make eye contact, and you need to say something. People come into our office and sometimes we're so busy, we don't even stop to look up to say, hi Anne, how are you today? We need to be that type of leader. So just use SEC in your life, and I know that you will get higher engagement in your team. Listen. We must listen. And we're not listening to hear, we listen to understand. It's 2 different things. I full disclosure, I was speaking to a leader a few months ago, and he said, Aka, why do people always come to you? Why are they not coming to me? Because he was a leader of a different part of the hotel. But all his staff came to me to talk, to discuss, to vent. So I told him, I said, for this example, his name is John. I said, John, I don't have a sign on my door that says, come talk to Aka. What I need you to do is do some introspection. Ask yourself, why are your members of your team not coming to you and they're coming to me? And then he was talking, and while I was talking, he was talking. I said, John, this is why. You don't listen to understand. You respond before people speak, and so they don't come to you. So don't be that leader. Listen. Empathize. Empathy means walking in the person's shoes. It means treating others how you want to be treated. It talks about finding best solutions. It talks about being professional, continuous learning, and following up and following through. So we just spoke about care plus action. So we're going to talk about consistency with accountability. How are you going to ensure that you are consistent in how you interact with others? And I put this plain here. Anyone, just unmute yourself for a couple of minutes and just share with me. When you get on a plane, what do you expect? What's your expectation? You buy a ticket, you go on a plane. What do you expect to happen from that pilot? Anyone?
Take me safely to my destination.
Get to your destination safely, right, Cindy?
Definitely.
There you go. Do you know that when people come to work, they expect you as a leader to take them through the day safely?
Agreed.
That in spite of any turbulence that may happen at work, that leader is supposed to navigate through that turbulence just like a pilot. You don't expect a pilot in turbulence to say, nah, I can't do this now. I good. I'm out. You don't, right? So as a leader, when there's crisis, and what a crisis is by definition, it's just an unforeseen circumstance, right? So as a leader, how do you become the anchor in a crisis? How do you ensure that there is some semblance of stability in the midst of the storm? Just like a pilot will assure you to put on your seatbelts, we're going to get some turbulence, but we're going to land safely. That's the type of assurance that your team looks to you as a leader to navigate in a crisis. And I'm going to share some tenets. If you are part of a leadership structure, these are some things that I want you to think about. How do you maintain stability in your organization? You hire the right person. When you hire someone, do not only use interviews, use multiple selection tools, because it gives you the opportunity to hire the best fit candidate. Because that candidate, you know, in crisis, they have the foundation to navigate through that crisis. You must orient persons when you hire them, because in orientation, as we know, that's when you get to understand the mission, the vision, the core values. That maintains consistency, because the person knows this is the environment that I'm getting into. So this is what I expect, regardless of the circumstance, regardless of the core values. Probationary period. Please use your probationary period, ladies and gentlemen, as a leader. That is so critical to ensure consistency. Do not wait until the probationary period is finished to realize that ACA is not a good fit. Your probationary period is to be used just for that reason. I cannot stress this enough. Training. When I worked at Hyatt Regency Trinidad, people would ask, Aka, how many expats you have at Hyatt? I was like 5%. They were always in shock. I said, listen, the excellent service that you received at Hyatt Regency Trinidad didn't just happen. They were trained. Our policy at Hyatt is no one interacts with a guest, an external guest, until they have successfully completed a training plan, which typically took 2 to 3 weeks. So that excellent service that you got happened because training. And training is not a destination, it's a journey. And what training is not a destination, it's a journey. What do I mean? Every day is an opportunity to train. On the job training, on the spot training. Training requires consistency, because if you do not address something that's not in alignment with policy and procedure, then you're moving away from consistent service. So in hospitality, that is something that we never compromise. SMART goals. There should be no one in your organization, including yourself, that should not have goals and objectives. And your goals must be SMART, specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-bound. That, again, when persons know what they're working towards, they have that roadmap of success. That is critical to maintain consistency in any environment. Performance management system. I'm always surprised when leaders tell me that they don't have a performance management system that is linked to merit increases. Again, there was a study done recently by Gallup, and they said that organizations that give merit increases based on longevity have a lower engagement score versus organizations that give merit increases based on performance. Because what happens is that your high performers, your D4s that we spoke about, highly competent, highly committed, they feel demotivated because the person right next to them, who's a D2, who just kind of skating through, gets the same increase as they do. So if you have a performance management system in your organization that everybody gets the same percentage, we need to talk, because it does not augur well for that consistent high performance environment. Everybody has an opportunity to learn and to grow. Again, training, where are the opportunities? Putting people on something called a performance improvement plan. I had a few court matters in Trinidad, and for persons who know our industrial relations court, know that as the employer, you're going in already with some points deducted just because you are the employer. And I actually was able to win a few matters in the industrial relations court when I terminated people because of performance. And this was the one thing that the magistrate mentioned that she wishes many organizations would do, which is a performance improvement plan. What is that? It says to me that, I'm going to just use you for now, Shivani. Shivani has had some performance issues. So she's been coached. And Shivani is at her final written warning. And I say, Shivani, come in. Come, let's have a conversation with Shivani's leader. We set out a roadmap for success. Shivani, these are the objectives I need you to achieve over the next 3 months. Every month we meet, we go over, this is what you did well, these are your areas of opportunity. This is what I need you to work on for the next month. At the end of that 3-month period, I then have a conversation with Shivani's leader, and we say, okay, this is your progress thus far. And at the end of that 3-month period, I have enough facts and data to make an informed decision about if Shivani is a good fit. That is what a performance improvement plan is. It gives you, the employer, more facts and data to support future disciplinary decisions. Again, progressive discipline. One-on-one conversations. Could anyone just put in the chat for me if you have one-on-one conversations weekly, monthly, or never at all? Just put one of those in the chat. Weekly, monthly, or never. One-on-one conversations with your leaders. How often does that happen? Let me see, how often? Put it in the chat for me. How often do you meet with your leaders? Or you could unmute yourself if you feel comfortable. Or I could call your names. Anyone? Hi.
Hi, Cindy here.
Hi, Cindy.
Hi. Well, I'm in relatively a new role right now. So
Okay.
for me, it's something that I do encourage. I even instigate as well because I see the benefits of doing it. And as you mentioned before, the situation that you were in, I have been in situations like that before. And that approach really has set the stage as to how you can proceed and how you can really progress from one step to the next, whether it be to help the employee or to bring that situation to a close. So it is really very helpful and very useful to take that approach.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Cindy, for sharing. Anyone else wants to share? How often do you have meetings, either as a leader with your team, or if you report to someone, how often do you meet with that person?
I've had an experience fairly recently where, at my urging, a weekly schedule of meetings was set up.
Yes.
However, invariably it would be postponed because there's a calendar conflict and stuff like that. So I felt, honestly, it gave me the feeling that there were other priorities that were more important than the role I had to play or the objectives that we were trying to work towards.
Yes.
And eventually, we did have it in, sporadically, but it was not, I felt as the person who, as the direct report,
Yes.
I didn't feel that I was given a fair shake in the sense that, you know, in terms of proper direction and support.
Yes.
So it was lacking for me.
Thank you so much for sharing, Anne. And leaders, what I want you to always do, your commitment to meet with your team is just as important as your commitment to meet with your leader. Because you don't want to devalue the opportunity, because one-on-ones is not always about work. One-on-ones is, hi, how are you doing today? It's checking in. So let's move on. Accountability. Do you know that you cannot hold someone else accountable if you first don't hold yourself accountable? How do I tell someone to do something that I am not doing? I don't know if there's anybody on this call that has teenagers. I don't know if you ever tried that with a teenager, to tell them, you do as I do. You do as I say, but not as I do. Listen, we can't do that as leaders. We need to walk the talk. All right. So that's what we do as leaders. All right. We already spoke about the SMART goals. We already talked about that follow up and follow through, but clearly accountability is key. And do you know that accountability is care? I only tell my leaders, because a lot of leaders are skeptical to hold people accountable, but we hold our children accountable. If your child is doing something, don't you correct them and say, don't do this? So accountability has to be care, because I don't want to see you fail. I want to prevent you from failing. So I am going to be holding you accountable so you could be the best version of yourself. All right. I know we have just about 10 minutes, so I'm just going to come on to the last part, which is competence with the right attitude. Leaders, your behavioral competencies are just as important as your technical. And some may argue your behavioral becomes more important depending on your level of leadership to your team. I can't remember the last time anyone asked me, where did I get my postgraduate or how many degrees I have. Nobody cares. People care about how you treat them, how you respect them. So these for me have been key competencies that I wanted to highlight. If you cannot communicate, you cannot be effective as a leader. Because in leadership, we tell people, we ask people, and we communicate. So you must have communication skills. You must be able to influence. Remember, I talked about influence and leadership? That leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. How creative are you? Are you status quo? Can I share with you that 21st century, there's nothing that is, you need to be able to think outside the box. I would even dare you destroy the box. Be creative. Think outside of the box. Emotional intelligence. I know people talk about it and it's a buzzword, but you could have the highest IQ. And if you don't have a high EI, I do not want you to lead me. Because persons who and leaders who are not high on emotional intelligence have toxic teams. You must. Financial acumen, business acumen, absolutely. You must know your competitive environment. You must know the context on which you're operating. You must know financial indicators. How do you get along with people? Do you know that to lead people, you have to love people? Many leaders get into leadership because of position and title. If that is your drive to get into leadership, then I humbly say to you, you shouldn't lead. Because leading people, the most important asset in any organization is a human asset. You have to love people to lead people. Resilience. Oh my goodness. During this pandemic, if you were not resilient, actually you wouldn't even be on this call, because you would have been somewhere else, right? Because resilience means getting up and finish strong, and teamwork. We will get through any crisis. We will evolve. We will pivot in any organizational dynamic if there's synergy. And the saying that your team is as strong as the weakest link is true. And that's why you as a leader, when you identify someone who may not be strong, how do you switch your leadership style to get them to that place of strength? All right, I'm going to go to the end. These are just definitions of what I would have just shared, but I wanted to talk a little bit about attitude. Take a couple of seconds and look at this picture. So, many people say you have a bad attitude. People really don't see your attitude. What they see is your behavior, right? Because your attitude is what is underneath. I think of this as the Titanic, right? They didn't know that the iceberg was so big because only the top was showing. The depth of your attitude is shaped by your values, your standards, your environment, life. But that attitude impacts your behavior. So as leaders, I want you to be cognizant of what is underneath that drives your behavior. Because your behavior is what is known to others. Your attitude is unknown to others because of the things that are underneath that is driving your behavior. So I want you to think about this, that the next time you have an interaction with someone that their behavior is not in alignment with what you expect, take a moment. What drove that behavior? And I think that's why I did a first degree in psychology, because I always wanted to understand, why do people do and say the things that they do and say? And when you study the mind, you understand it's their environment, it's life situations. There's so many different dynamics that impact the known. So I want you to take a moment when we end this session, think about the unknowns and how does those unknown factors drive you? How does it impact your behavior? So just in summary, as we wrap up, I want you to remember a couple of things. As you evolve as a leader, there is no bad leadership style or good. It depends on the situation. It depends on the person. It depends on the task. And as an evolutionary leader, there are 6 mandates that I want you to remember. Care with action, consistency with accountability, and competence with the right attitude. And I want you to think about this phrase, and it's something that I've really inculcated into who I am today. I see leadership as such a privilege, such an honor. And I always remind myself that it really is a badge of honor and not a badge of power. As leaders, we need to remember that it's such an honor to have someone look to you for guidance. It's such an honor for someone to trust you enough. So I want you to always think about that, and that care is a verb. It's not a noun. It's not an adjective. And I think as society, if we stop saying it and start doing it, care, respect, that we will be better off And if we use care as a verb, then we will all be at a better place. And I just wanted to end by saying that we can do all things. We have the power, we have the privilege to lead others to success, to add value to others.